Picture this, it's 500 BC. You're standing on the southern slope of Mount Parnassus, in the region of Phocis in central Greece. The elevation here is roughly 570 meters above sea level. Below you, the Pleistos Valley stretches out in pale morning light. Above you, the twin rock faces of the Phaedriades cliffs rise almost vertically, sheer, grey, and enormous. Between you and those cliffs sits the most visited religious site in the entire Greek world. This is Delphi. The permanent population is small, a few hundred people at most, but the sanctuary draws visitors from Sicily, from Egypt, from Asia Minor, from every corner of the Mediterranean. Kings send envoys here before going to war. City councils consult it before passing laws. Generals ask it about battle formations. But what actually happens here on an ordinary day? Not the mythology, not the legend. The actual, physical, operational reality of this place. What does it look like? The first sound you notice is water. It moves constantly here. The Castalia spring runs from a narrow gorge between the cliffs, channeled through a stone basin carved directly into the rock face. By the time the sky begins to lighten, people are already there. Not many, but enough. Pilgrims who arrived the previous evening and camped near the lower terraces of the sanctuary are washing before sunrise. The ritual is expected. Anyone approaching the temple precinct must be clean. The spring doesn't just supply the religious requirement, it supplies the settlement's drinking water as well. There is no separate municipal water infrastructure in Delphi. The spring is both sacred and functional, and the distinction between those two categories is not one the people here would recognize as meaningful. The permanent residents of Delphi live in modest stone houses built into the hillside. The architecture is adapted to the slope. Rooms at different levels, walls thick enough to hold the cold of these altitudes, small windows that face away from the prevailing wind. These are not wealthy households. The people who live here full-time are craftsmen, merchants who supply the sanctuary economy, lower-ranking temple staff and their families. The priests of Apollo maintain separate quarters within the sanctuary complex itself. The Pythia, the woman who serves as the oracle, lives inside the temple precinct and does not move freely through the town. She has not done so for years. The air at this hour carries the smell of charcoal and cold stone. By mid-morning it will shift. The altar in front of the temple of Apollo burns continuously, and the smoke from the sacrifices, mostly goat, occasionally ox, drifts downhill and settles into the lower streets. You get used to it. The people who live here have lived with that smell their entire lives. When the consultation day is active, and not every day is, the sanctuary fills faster than you might expect. The access system is organized. Cities and kingdoms that have been granted promontia, priority access to the oracle, send their delegations to the front of the line. Athens holds this privilege, so does Sparta. So do several smaller city-states that donated treasuries to the sanctuary over the preceding century. Each of these treasure houses is visible along the sacred way, the paved processional path that winds uphill from the main entrance toward the temple. They are not large buildings. They are rectangular stone structures, roughly the size of a small house, built by different polis in different architectural styles. Walking up the sacred way, you pass the treasury of the Siphnians, elaborately carved, built around 525 BC after Siphnos struck gold, and then the treasury of the Athenians, built from Pentelic marble. Each one represents a political investment in Delphi's goodwill. The pilgrims who don't have promontia status wait. The wait can last most of the day. They sit along the edges of the processional path, or gather near the Stoa, the long colonnaded hall built by the Athenians below the main terrace, which provides shade and a surface to rest against. These are not idle tourists. They have walked in many cases for weeks. Some have crossed the sea. They carry offerings, they carry written questions, or they've memorized them. They've been told by their local priests exactly how to phrase what they want to ask. The oracle is not a conversation. You ask, you receive an answer, you leave. The consultation itself follows a fixed sequence that everyone who works in the sanctuary knows by routine. A goat is brought to the main altar for a preliminary sacrifice. Cold water is poured over the animal's head. If it shivers, the sign is favorable, and the consultation proceeds. If not, the session is delayed. This is not theatre. This is a genuine operational checkpoint embedded in the day's schedule, one that can, and occasionally does, halt the entire process. When the sign is favorable, the supplicant presents a pelanos, grounds a flat ritual cake, and pays the consultation fee to the priests managing the access. The fee varies by the type of question and by the status of the questioner. City-state delegations pay considerably more than individual pilgrims. The Pythia prepares separately. She has been fasting since the previous evening. Before the consultation begins, she bathes again in the Castalia spring, burns an offering of barley meal and laurel leaves, and enters the inner precinct alone. She descends into the adyton, the innermost chamber of the temple partially below ground level, and takes her position on a bronze tripod set over a narrow fissure in the limestone floor. The geology beneath the Temple of Apollo is unusual. Two fault lines intersect almost directly under the building, passing through layers of bituminous limestone. Groundwater moving through those faults dissolves hydrocarbons from the rock and carries them upward as gas, primarily ethylene, with traces of ethane and methane. In the confined space of the adyton, the concentration is enough to produce lightheadedness, altered perception, and a state the ancient Greeks read as divine contact. The Pythia doesn't know the geological explanation. Neither does anyone else in 500 BC. What they observe is that she enters the chamber, inhales the air above the fissure, and begins to speak in ways that are different from ordinary speech, fragmented, rapid, sometimes incoherent. The priests stationed near the entrance receive her words, interpret them, and deliver a formal response to the waiting supplicant. Whether the Pythia's words are always interpreted accurately, or whether the priests exercise significant editorial control, is not a question anyone in Delphi asks openly. Around midday, the pace of the sanctuary slows. The Pythia can manage 3 to 4 consultation sessions in a single active day, each lasting roughly an hour or more. Between sessions, she rests. The priests handle the administrative work, recording consultations, managing the treasury accounts, receiving delegations, and overseeing the maintenance of the sanctuary buildings. The temple complex requires constant upkeep. The roof tiles, the column drums, the drainage channels along the sacred way, all of it requires workers, materials, and money. The sanctuary draws its operating budget from the consultation fees, from the offerings stored in the treasuries, and from the territories in Phocis controlled by the Amphictyonic League, the loose council of Greek tribes that governs Delphi's religious administration. The food available in Delphi is limited by geography. This is a mountain location with no flat agricultural land nearby. Almost everything consumed here comes from the Pleistos Valley below, carried up on muleback, along tracks that are steep enough to make the ascent slow even with animals. Grain comes from the lowlands. Olive oil comes from Phocis and Boeotia. Wine is imported, often brought by pilgrim delegations as part of their offering. The craftsmen and small merchants who operate near the lower entrance of the sanctuary sell votive objects: small bronze figurines, terracotta statuettes, laurel branches, and incense to pilgrims who need offerings but didn't carry enough from home. These stalls are informal but consistent. They exist because the demand is constant. A pilgrim who has traveled 2 weeks on foot to ask the oracle about a land dispute is not going to turn back because he forgot to bring a proper pelanos. The afternoon is when the public spaces of the sanctuary see the most non-religious activity. The stoa of the Athenians below the main terrace functions as a resting and gathering space for delegations waiting their turn. Groups from different city-states sit in proximity to one another. Argives near Corinthians, Thessalians near Spartans. These groups do not always share political sympathies outside Delphi's boundaries, but the sanctuary maintains a general truce during religious operations. The space functions, in practical terms, as a diplomatic corridor. Information moves here. City officials hear what other city officials are asking the oracle about. A delegation from a coastal city observes that a delegation from an island is present and draws its own conclusions about what they might be consulting on. The gymnasium, built in a terrace below the main sanctuary, sees use in the afternoon as well, primarily by younger men in the pilgrim groups and by the athletic competitors who come to Delphi for the Pythian Games held every 4 years. In 500 BC, those games are still a living institution, established formally in 582 BC, and include musical competitions alongside athletic events. The track and the practice area of the gymnasium are used for training between formal events. On an ordinary day, they are occupied but not crowded. As the afternoon light changes and the shadow of Parnassus begins to extend over the lower terraces, the active part of the sanctuary day winds down. The consultation is over. The Pythia has returned to her quarters. The priests perform the closing rituals at the altar, and the eternal flame, maintained continuously in the temple of Hestia, which shares the precinct with Apollo's temple, is tended by the designated attendant. This flame is not symbolic. Its maintenance is a logistical task like any other. It requires fuel, it requires someone responsible, and it requires a contingency if it goes out, which it occasionally does. Pilgrim delegations that received their responses begin departing. Those who arrived that morning and completed their consultation may attempt the descent to the valley before dark. Those who arrived from farther away and need to rest will stay at one of the modest lodging structures at the base of the sanctuary or camp along the road. There are no hotels in Delphi. Hospitality is organized informally through connections. A delegation from Athens might stay with an Athenian proxenos, a local resident who maintains formal ties with a foreign city and hosts its officials when they visit. This institution exists across the Greek world and functions here as it does elsewhere. Practical, reciprocal, based on long-standing personal relationships rather than any official lodging system. After dark, Delphi has no street lighting. The sanctuary paths are navigable by torch, and the priests who remain on duty through the night carry them. But the town below the sanctuary, the cluster of houses where the permanent residents live, goes dark early. Olive oil lamps provide light inside homes. Outside, movement after dark is limited to what is necessary. The altitude makes the nights cold even in summer. In winter, the mountain above regularly accumulates snow, and the roads down to the valley become difficult. The settlement is effectively isolated for stretches of time each year, and the residents provision accordingly, storing grain, oil, and dried goods in quantities sufficient to last through periods when the road is impassable. At night, the sanctuary is quieter than its daytime function suggests. The buildings that dominate the terrace, the temple, the treasury houses, the stoa, are closed. The monument bases along the sacred way, crowded with bronze statues donated by various cities, stand in darkness. The statues are not few. By this period, the approach to the temple is dense with votive offerings in bronze and stone, athletes, gods, mythological figures, commemorations of military victories. Cities use Delphi to display their achievements before an audience of all other Greeks. A bronze charioteer dedicated by a Syracusan tyrant stands alongside a monument from the Athenians, commemorating a victory over the Persians. The dedications accumulate year by year, and the sanctuary grounds are slowly running out of space. The night passes. The Castalia spring continues to flow. The altar flame continues to burn. The fissure beneath the adyton continues to breathe its slow, odorless exhalation into the chamber above. By dawn, the first pilgrims will be at the spring again. The cycle of the sanctuary resumes. Delphi operated this way, as a functioning religious institution with a real infrastructure, a managed economy, and an organized access system, for more than 1,000 years. The geological conditions that produced the oracle's altered states were not understood until geologists mapped the fault lines beneath the temple site in the late 20th century. The sanctuary eventually fell into disuse after a series of Roman period destructions and the formal closure of pagan sites under Christian imperial rule in the late 4th century AD. What the Greeks built here, the road networks maintained to reach it, the treasury buildings representing 7 different polis, the hydraulic system feeding the Castalia basin, the administrative structure managing consultation access, was one of the ancient world's most durable and consistently functional religious operations. It ran not on mystery alone, but on logistics, fees, and the labor of people whose names were never recorded. If you want to keep exploring what daily life actually looked like inside the ancient world's most powerful cities and sanctuaries, there's more where this came from. Drop in the comments which civilization you want to walk through next.